Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you for having me to the 2025 Stir Trek. This is my second time participating in one of these amazing events, and I gotta say, they really put on a great show. They treat the speakers really well, so if you ever have thought about dipping your toe into the amazing world of presenting, this is an amazing place to give it a shot. We're going to talk about the amazing and exciting world of vulnerability management. Woo! I know, right? Yeah. So we're going to talk about the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Vulniverse. For those of you that may or may not be involved in blue team or red team, there's this whole amazing ecosystem that lives upstream, a lot of standards and frameworks and processes, and they have a lot of very obtuse names and jargons and acronyms. We're going to walk through, and I'm going to explain some of these to you so that when you see some of these terms flashed in front of your face, you'll go, ah, Crow told me about that. I remember all about that. I'm Crobe. I do security stuff on the internet. I'm the chief security architect for the Open Source Security Foundation, which is a Linux Foundation project. I've been doing cybersecurity for almost 30 years. I've been started off in desktop, worked my way into servers and networking, and then into architecture, and I've been doing InfoSec for a very long time. I've had the opportunity to work directly upstream with coordinated vulnerability disclosure for about 15 years. So anyone remember Heartbleed and Shell Shock? Aww. Those got me a job at Red Hat because my boss didn't want to have to deal with it, so I got to deal with the coordination. Anyone here have a little problem called Spectre Meltdown? Yeah. I was the coordinator on the open source side when the team were ready to try to get other folks to help out. So I've had the opportunity to participate in a lot of very severe security events, trying to help provide calm, reassuring advice, give people the facts so they can make their own risk-based decisions. If you take nothing else away from this today, I want you all to remember, don't panic, it'd be okay. There are a lot of people that work on this and try to provide downstream information so that you all can work on defending your projects, your organizations, your customers. So security has a ton of jargon, a lot of obtuse phrases, and there are some potentially scary names, and I want to help kind of demystify that. I want you all to remember computers are hard, but don't worry. There's a lot of folks here to help you out. Oh man, I forgot my costume. Rookie mistake. I brought my towel and my robe, because if anyone's read The Hitchhiker's Guide, you know you've got to always be prepared and appropriately dressed for the occasion. So within vulnerability disclosure and vulnerability management, the process at a very high level is, first off, the flaw is discovered and reported to someone with authority. Ideally, it's a project maintainer or a manufacturer that maintains some type of program or system, but sometimes it might be that the maintainer might not be able to be found, so there could be a coordinator like CERT-CC or JP-CERT that steps in to help out. Then that issue, once it gets to the right people, gets analyzed, they understand what the problem is, and they start to develop the next stage. They start to work on the fix. They'll go through, they'll make the fix, they'll test the fix, then they'll start to work with those special partners to try to help get things staged so that when the public is ready to be told about this vulnerability and it's disclosed, that everybody gets the opportunity to have access to the information at the same time. So during this time when things are being coordinated upstream, you have that collateral creation phase, which we'll talk about a couple things there. And then finally, PD is public disclosure. That's the day you all get to learn about the new terrible thing and how to get access to those patches. So we're going to talk about this workflow and dive into some of these things. So at the flaw reporting stage, there's a couple items, a couple little jargon items here. You'll have a VDP, bug bounty, and then you'll have an entity called a CNA. So how does this stuff get found? Is anyone here, and it's hard to see with the lights, but is anyone here a security researcher? Have you ever found a vulnerability or a bug and reported it to a project? Maybe? No? Aw, it's fun. Well, there's a lot of different reasons why people find flaws. Sometimes it's their job. You have people that it's their job to be a dedicated security researcher. There are security companies like Talos or other entities that go out and actually comb software projects for bugs. A lot of times students will do this as part of their either master's or PhD work. You'll have organizations. So my organization, the Linux Foundation and the OpenSSF, we have security researchers that work with us, and sometimes we'll go out and start hunting problems. Developers are actually one of the biggest means with which bugs are found. As someone's interacting with the code base, they'll find a bug, they'll report the bug, and ideally the maintainer will start to work on it. You'll have community maintainers, users, and unfortunately evil hackers sometimes are also looking for bugs, actually a lot. And you'll see this, sometimes it's found throughout the process of regular maintenance or patching. Sometimes it's just part of the SDLC. I added, hey, Oli, somebody will be adding a new feature. They'll be going through their CI system, and something within the test harness or your tooling will throw up, hey, there's this new problem. You'll also have people that will go in and do dedicated pen testing and fuzzing, and a lot of times things are found totally by accident. So the two phrases I talked about on this stage, we have VDP and BB. VDP stands for Vulnerability Disclosure Program. This is a process or a team, some entity, normally a commercial enterprise, but this happens a lot upstream as well. Hey, Oli, go away. Upstream will have, I totally threw me off, but somebody will have a process by which when vulnerabilities are found, they tell you how to report it to them, and they tell you how they manage this, how they go through, how they evaluate it and triage it, and the subsequent steps we're going to deal with. Another flavor of this is the bug bounty, and this is a group. An organization will either self-fund it or they'll go through a third party like HackerOne or Integrity, and they will say every bug found, we will pay money for it. And depending on the severity of that bug, you'll get potentially a higher bounty reward. So these are two ways with which either an upstream project or a commercial enterprise or even a company. I worked at a bank for a period of time, and we had a bug bounty for our online banking platform. So basically, these are just ways for people to, when you find a bug, a vulnerability, you report it to us, and that kind of tells the rules of how we handle it. Moving on, once you have that bug report, there's a lot of additional steps that need to go through to validate, is this thing actually a problem? A lot of times there's a dispute between the researcher and a maintainer, like the maintainer thinks this isn't a bug, the researcher thinks it is, and there's kind of a negotiation that goes back and forth. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on during this analysis phase. So as we go through, the primary job of the maintainer or the organization that has this vulnerability report is they want to make sure, they want to understand what is the problem, what are the consequences if this problem is an actual thing, and then they start to think about, well, what might some solutions be as they're going through, and they're always kind of thinking this in the back of their head. And once they confirm that, yes, this report is valid, we need to move forward, they'll go out and they'll get something which is called a CVE. Before last week, had anyone ever heard of the word CVE? Yeah, last week we had, actually 2 weeks ago, we had a little bit of a kerfuffle upstream with the CVE program, and that brought that to light for a lot of lay people. But CVE used to stand for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. A couple of years back, they refactored that, and now CVE stands for CVE. Super helpful, guys. Thanks. But this is a common identifier that describes a unique, a singular vulnerability. There are entities minted through the CVE program called CNAs. That's a CVE numbering authority. So think about that as, Microsoft, Red Hat, the Linux kernel are all CNAs, and they have the ability to mint a CVE. And that's how researchers and organizations and maintainers and how downstream talk about that particular problem. A CVE has a very particular format, and you'll see here, you'll start off with CVE, then you'll get the year with which the CVE was requested, and then you'll get some unique number. And this, each CNA has a range of numbers they use. So if you pay attention close enough, you'll be able to kind of identify, oh, that's a Microsoft bug, that's a Oracle bug. So if you are in the game long enough, you'll be able to kind of identify this. But generally, for most people, it's just another string of numbers. And again, the year talks about when that was, when that CVE was grabbed by the CNA, and then that number. This is the particular problem. And the CVE, you have to have that number, that string. You also have to have a description of what the problem is. And then generally the other requirement is if there's additional information, if you have links or resources, so if you wrote a blog or you use a defect tracking system or the issue is in GitHub, part of the CVE record is you'll point off to different pieces of collateral that are useful to understand more about that vulnerability. So a CVE represents a vulnerability. You will never have two vulnerabilities represented by the same ID. You'd have to have two IDs. And as you're going through and doing this analysis, there's another C thing that gets assigned, a CWE. A CWE stands for a Common Weakness Enumerator. And for developers out there, you may have bumped into this if you've ever run a scanning tool or looked at SANS top 25 CWEs. The CWE represents the root cause of the issue. This is why this is broken. This is the mistake, the flaw the developer made, or the error that was embedded into the hardware. And again, you sometimes might have multiple CWEs. CWE is a hierarchical system where you'll have a very high level number, and then potentially you'll have a more precise sub number, and the methodology prefers you to use the best precision possible, but sometimes people aren't good at identifying the root cause, so they might mess up and pick the wrong one or pick multiple ones. But this provides you an understanding of why this vulnerability happened. CWE starts off with CWE and then some number, and then you can go look that up in the dictionary. And again, software weakness, this is talking about the problem. It could be a problem with the architecture, the design, could be a coding error, something with implementation. And then ideally, the CWE also describes to you kind of why this is important, why you need to take action. As the maintainer or the manufacturer is going through and doing their analysis, so now they have a number to identify this is the flaw, they have the root cause of why this flaw happened. Then they'll move into something to tell you, kind of describe how that vulnerability works and kind of the severity, kind of give you a hint of how important this is. And that's when we move into something called CVSS. CVSS stands for the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. They really loved C's as we were all kind of developing these frameworks and standards. But CVSS is a methodology by which the analyst will go through and describe to you how this problem works, what the consequences could be, and then you'll get an estimate of the severity, like how quickly you should probably try to address this. And this is where we have a lot of negotiation between the research community and a maintainer commercial entity, because there's always a disagreement. The researcher is generally interested in fame and glory. They want the highest possible severity so they get potentially the most bug bounty reward. And the manufacturer is there to try to help remove FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and try to be as precise as possible and describe to you as accurately as possible what this problem is. So I'm going to show you a CVSS string in a minute, but broadly, there are 17 dimensions with which someone will analyze this vulnerability. They talk about the attack vector, the attack complexity, is there any user interaction required, how does it affect CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Then you'll go through and all of those aspects are rated on a none, low, or high scale. And then there are some additional things in the methodology that are designed for downstream. So if you're a blue team defender and you get a new report that there's this scary CVE on the horizon, there's some additional things that you can do to apply your organizational controls. So let's say everything is behind a firewall. Well, that might increase the complexity of the attack, or it might reduce the ability to exfiltrate data. So you have the ability to tailor this in the methodology to adjust it to your particular risk appetite and your risk program. So this is what the CVSS string looks like, and that probably didn't show up great. Oh, green was a terrible choice. I'm sorry. But essentially, everything starts off, and it will tell you what the version of the framework they're using are. This is CVSS v4. Then it'll move across and show you each aspect of how this describes to you how the vulnerability works. And this is the most important part of the methodology. You will also get a score, which to me is the least important part of the aspect, because CVSS is not describing risk. It's describing how the vulnerability works. It's incumbent upon the operator or the blue team to understand what the risk is and describe that. But you'll go through and you can decode the string, and the string will tell you exactly how this flaw works. Does it require user access? Is it accessible over the network? Do you need to have escalated permissions, for example? A lot of these vulnerabilities that get the very high scores sometimes require like root access. And if you have root, why are you going to go through some esoteric hoop jumping to leverage this weird vulnerability? You can just log in and do what you want if you already have the keys to root. So as we're going through and doing this analysis, so we have our identifier, we understand the root cause, we've described how it works, and we've given downstream a prioritization. You know, we think this is important, work on this now, or this is low priority, you have some time to deal with this. This is where something called SBOM interacts. And this is where, as a manufacturer, it's very common within modern development that an organization will use one library, so OpenSSL, and they'll embed that in multiple products. And SBOM is a way with which people can understand where that component exists within that project or product, depending on what the situation is. SBOM, and if I say SBOM 3 times, my friend Alan Friedman will pop up out of nowhere. He's the father of SBOM within the U.S. government. SBOM stands for Software Bill of Materials. This is a manifest of what's in the box. If you've ever eaten a box of cereal and you're sitting there munching on the cereal and you're looking at the box, you might turn to the side and you get the calorie information. There's also a list of ingredients. SBOM is the analogy in the software hardware space of that that label that you get from the FDA. This is a machine-readable format that describes all the components and their dependencies that are required for those components inside. And this is where, once you have the SBOM, you're able to start to evaluate what components are in there and what CVEs are applicable to those components. There are multiple formats for SBOM. The 2 big camps are SPDX and CycloneDX. They both work very well, and they're kind of tailored to different audiences. So depending, you may use one or the other, you may prefer one or the other, or you do both. There are 6 different types of SBOM. Depending on where you are in the software development lifecycle, there's a SBOM for you. So if you're in the very early stages, you're starting to conceptualize your program, you might want to design SBOM. But if you are an actual developer and you're like looking at your dependencies, that's where the source SBOM might work for you. But if you're downstream, you probably want either the build SBOM, like what was the circumstances with which this was built, what are the dependencies to make the build chain, the compiler options and everything, or you might want the deployed or runtime SBOM. So there is no a SBOM. If anyone that's in operations today and you have to deal with SBOMs, there are many different types and they're applicable to where you are within the software development lifecycle. But broadly, the minimum core elements that an SBOM needs to have, you need to have the author's name, who supplied the software, the name of the component, the version or version string of that component. You need to have a hash to be able to digitally identify that component. You need to have a unique identifier, and then you need to have some type of relationship. Is this a transitive dependency? Is it a library or a framework that's needed? Now, we've gone through and done all this. You know, the maintainer or the manufacturer is ready to go. We're working on the fixes. Well, now we need to start to write the fixes, and we also need to start to tap in certain people that are necessary to help get this information staged and in the hands of the public once it goes live. So first off, as we're in this phase, once we've validated this vulnerability as a thing, we're testing it. We're hammering on it with our test suite to understand, did our fix work? Are there any variations to how the exploit the researcher gave us? We're trying to go through and understand this. And this is where this period is referred to as an embargo. This is a time when things are quiet, where we aren't going to publicly discuss this. The only people that know about the vulnerability have need to know. So, for example, the Linux kernel is used everywhere. And there is a coordinated disclosure process. So when Linus and Greg validate that there's a bug, they have a notification process that they'll tell the Linux distributions and the hyperscalers, and they will give those entities the patches so that they can stage them, so that when the bug is ready to go live, everybody can flip the switch and downstream can instantly get access to those patches, as opposed to telling you there's a problem, but there's no way for you to ever get it. Couple weird little pieces of jargon. You'll have a CRD, a coordinated release date. This is a date that everybody that's read into that problem agrees we're going to go public. Normally it's 10 a.m. Pacific Standard for whatever reason. Things generally go out on the second Tuesday of every month on Patch Tuesday. And then that date is called the public disclosure date, PD. Sometimes the embargo gets broken. So, every person you include in this secret exponentially increases the chances that they're going to tell somebody that's not authorized. So that's when we're in this embargo period, everyone's very hyper aware and hypersensitive and working as quickly as possible to get the fixes ready and get the fixes staged so that downstream has the ability to get those patches and apply those treatments. So coordination is, again, you need to have some part in this puzzle. You need to be a developer with specific subject matter expertise that I need to tag you in because I need help, because I'm the developer and I don't understand this particular piece. Or maybe you're somebody that is you have the ability to stage the patches for downstream for when things go live. But everybody involved here has this need to know. CVD is talking about coordinated vulnerability disclosure. And this is broadly the process by which the ecosystem informs those people first with need to know, and then we'll work our way down and ultimately towards public disclosure, making sure that the appropriate people have access to the information in the patches at the appropriate time. This is an awesome diagram we helped develop it when I was on a work group trying to describe multi-party coordinated vulnerability disclosure. But as you can see, depending on how complex the piece of software is or hardware, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of players. So there's a lot of complexity here. Thankfully, knock on wood, embargoes don't get broken often, which is great because people respect the fact that we're all working towards protecting the public. We want to try to get things ready for the general public as quickly as possible. All right. Now, you will sometimes see something called TLP as we go through some of these things, where documents will be tagged TLP green, TLP red. And this is a way, especially when we're in the embargo phase, it tells you what you are allowed to share and with whom. TLP stands for Traffic Light Protocol, and this encourages sharing of information appropriately. And it tells you when you can't share it. So TLP red is you are never allowed to share this. This information is given exclusively to you. You are read in. As we move down the chain, TLP amber, you are allowed to you are allowed to share this in a limited fashion. So if I'm the program manager for a security incident response team and I'm not writing the fix, if somebody gives me a TLP Amber coded artifact, I'm allowed to share that with my team that's able to fix it, but I couldn't give it to my customers and I can't give it to my leadership. Then you have TLP Green, which is you are allowed to share within your community, so it's again a little bit broader scope, and then TLP Clear is fully public. And anyone that works with federal government in the US especially, and also Europe a little bit, you'll see TLP come up quite a lot. Now, so we've found the problem, we understand the problem, we're working on the fixes. Now we're trying to work on the collateral. How are we going to share this information with downstream? How are we going to get people what they need to know? The primary means with which this information is shared is a security advisory normally. The technical term is a VDR, a Vulnerability Disclosure Report, but everybody just calls it advisories. There is a commonly used format called CSAF, the Common Security Advisory Format, and that is what most commercial vendors will use. That's the format with which they will publish their advisory. But those of you that might work in GitHub, you might be familiar with a GitHub Security Advisory. That's kind of the same thing. It just doesn't follow the CSAF format. So security advisories will generally include a lot of information. You've got to have that vulnerability identifier, that CVE. You should have a time and a day. You should be able to tell people, what this affects, the product, the component. Are there any dependencies? You need to have a description. And then, most importantly, you have that mitigation. You tell customers, with this advisory, I'm delivering a patch. Here's how to get it. With this advisory, there is no fix available, but here are some workarounds or other mitigations. So you need to describe all this information. And normally, like within CSAF advisories, you'll have access to SBOMs, you'll have access to VEX, other methodologies like EPSS and KEV will also be in there, and I'll talk about a couple of these in a second. So let's see, let's skip that. So collateral. So VEX is a new advisory format. It stands for Vulnerability Exploitability Exchange. And this talks about the effectiveness of the software to a particular vulnerability. So let's think about modern software development where you'll have some code that you wrote, then you'll have a bunch of dependencies you rely on and libraries and frameworks that you use. So let's say you use the Spring framework or whatever you're using, and it's included as part of your product. Well, your implementation of Spring may not be vulnerable, and that's where you can use a tool like VEX to say, yes, that is part of our software, but we are not exploitable because of these reasons. And VEX is a great way that works with security scanners to help squash false positives. That if you trust the person that issued the VEX statement, you're able to potentially shut down a lot of noise within the system. A VEX, you have 4 states. I'm not affected, I'm affected, this has been fixed, or it's under investigation. Then it talks about, and the reasons why you might not be affected. You could be the component was not present, the vulnerable code isn't present, the vulnerable code isn't in the execution path, the vulnerable code can't be controlled by an adversary, or there's some type of inline mitigation that already exists. There are 4 tools that are able to issue VEXs today: CSAF, CycloneDX, SPDX, and OpenVEX. So there's a lot of different ways you can get this information about are you affected or not. And this is fairly new. It's a pretty cutting edge thing. You'll start to, some of the scanner vendors, Sift and Gripe and Trivy, take this today. So if you're in open source space, they're able to respect OpenVEX or VEX statements. And then some of the commercial scanner vendors we're working with to get them to adopt this and be able to ingest this so that you can, again, have a better ops experience. We've got our collateral together, the patches are ready, I've got VEX statements and advisories. Now we're ready to go to the public. All right, and this is where many of you will interact with CVE. This is the NVD, the National Vulnerability Database. This is a system run by the US government, and it predominantly tracks software and hardware that the US government uses. There are some exceptions to that. There are additional things in there, but the primary stakeholder for NVD is the US government. So if that is something that is not necessarily in your scope of concern, or you have some broader concerns, NVD doesn't cover all vulnerabilities. So if you think that it has everything, it does not. So please be aware of that. And NVD is what most commercial scanner vendors use, and we've been coaching them to also supplement with manufacturer vendor information so that they have a more complete data set. So another new tool is EPSS, and this is where I'm an expert level. I'm a super cyber person. I want to get in there and kind of live with some of this stuff, and I want to have a better description to what my, I want to talk to my business or my stakeholders about why this particular thing is important. And that's where you can use EPSS as one of the methodologies. That's the Exploit Prediction Scoring System. And this takes 25 years of CVE data, and based off of patterns of exploitation, they give you a probability score that this CVE has an EPSS score of this, where it's likely to be exploited or improbable to be exploited. And this is, again, another expert mode depending on where you are in the SDLC and operations of your organization. This may be something useful for you to do. But EPSS includes data from NVD and other sources. It includes things like CPE, which is a common product enumerator. Talks about the age of the vulnerability, gives you a bunch of reference information, gives you the CVSS metrics, and then they go through and do this analysis. Based off of historic data, we're able to say a OpenSSL vulnerability has been exploited 80% of the time, so in the future, these vulnerabilities are more likely to be exploited, for example. Another metric, which I would strongly recommend anyone on a blue team cyber group, is SSVC. This is Stakeholder-Specific Vulnerability Coordination. And this is where you take all this information, you take EPSS score, the CVSS, and based off of your organization's policies, your risk management framework, your risk appetites, you're able to make an adjustment. And this is actually a more substantive, actionable metric for you to work off of if you're trying to prioritize fixing vulnerabilities. But SSVC talks about the exploitation status, talks about the technical impact. Is this attack automatable? Is there some type of mission prevalence? So does this happen? Is this attack focused on nuclear reactors? Oh boy, I sure would like to get those fixed more quickly than the cafeteria soda machine, right? And then it talks about the public well-being of the report. So is this something that affects like internet infrastructure? Well, that's going to adjust this SSVC score to make it a higher priority to do more quickly. There's also an ability to provide not affected, and then for your organization, if we have an awesome privileged identity management system, or I have amazing web application firewalls, if you're able to put in your organization's controls to adjust the score for your organization, so it's just not some strange generic number that has no relation to you, your business, and your customers. KEV is another feature, and this is something, again, it's another U.S. government program that's focused on hardware and software the U.S. government uses. The U.S. government uses a lot of hardware and software, but they don't use it all. But KEV stands for Known Exploited Vulnerabilities. And this is kind of the red flag. They shoot up the flare. These vulnerabilities on the KEV list are being actively used in attacks now. This is probably one of the more important lists to pay attention to, because these are things that are actively used in attacks as opposed to some hypothetical thought experiment, which a lot of the, especially low vulnerabilities, tend to be kind of hypothetical thought experiments. But KEV, it's in a machine-readable format. Oh boy, everybody really wants me. And it talks about everything on this list within a KEV has been actively exploited. And they give you the CVE information that we talked about, that unique identifier. It gives you links to advisories, if a vendor has patches or mitigation. So the KEV collects all this information. And this is a list I would strongly encourage you to subscribe to and monitor, because this is the bad stuff that is actually being attacked, as opposed to the other 20,000 things a year that potentially aren't attacked. I'm going to skip over support life cycles. All right, so I gave you a lot of information. We zipped through a lot of this. There's a lot of jargon, a lot of alphabet letters and numbers. Does anyone have any questions? I'll poke my head in the Discord, and then I'll step out of the line of the lights here. But does anyone have any questions that I might be able to answer for you? Yes.
So in our reports from our testing team, we started to see more CWE showing up in the results.
Yes.
Whereas we used to just get CVEs. In prioritization of those, so my understanding was a CWE was a path to a CVE.
No.
Is that incorrect?
That's incorrect. So the gentleman here describes his team has been getting reports for a long time with the CVE information, and very recently he's been getting more CWE information. CWE, again, describes the root cause, the coding mistake of why this is broken. And the CVE program, one of the things they do is they enhance the data that comes along with vulnerabilities, and one of those new required fields is they're encouraging everyone to add CWE. So if you have scanners, like a lot of static scanners, SAS tools will work off of CWE. And like back when I worked at Red Hat Product Security, we loved CWE because I could look at how many kernel vulnerabilities were there last year, and were they all of a similar CWE, a coding flaw? Well, then I can go train that team saying, hey, you all are making a really similar series of mistakes. Let's give you some AppSec training on how to avoid, doing buffer overflows or input validation, that type of stuff. So CWE is kind of a natural sister to CVE, but it is not. It's talking about the why, it's the root cause, and the CVE is the what. This is a problem.
So in the prioritization, remediation, which carries more weight?
So the follow-up question was: is there, which one has a higher priority? How should I go off of one or the other? It depends on where you are in the SDLC. So if you're an application security professional, you do DevSecOps, I would lean more into CWE because those are teachable moments. I can go get training from OWASP or SANS or the Linux Foundation to teach you how to stop making these types of coding mistakes. But if you are a cyber, you're a CSIRT person, your vulnerability management program, you're focused more on the CVE. And that's because that's normally what you're measured on, is you need to fix these things because you, like PCI says, you have to fix something with a certain threshold within a certain time. Did that address your questions?
I think so.
Excellent. Any other questions in the room before I pop over to see if Discord had any questions for us? Ha. So you now are all vulnerability experts. Get away from the speaker so we don't get feedback. You're all vulnerability experts, so you all can do what I do, and I'm looking forward to seeing you and vulnerability coordinations. If you have questions, my organization is, I work, again, for the Linux Foundation. We have a whole group dedicated towards vulnerability disclosure. It's a free and open public group. I also work with an organization called FIRST, which is the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. So if you work for a corporate security team or a product security team, FIRST is a great organization where you can get training about these methodologies, these frameworks, and learn how to do the analysis and how to go through and be able to understand what these things mean. And I just want to say, thank you all for your time and attention, and I hope you learned a little something today. Thank you.